Okay, let's unpack this deep dive on California.
Let's do it.
Because if you're like most people, you have this mental image of the Golden State.
Right. Hollywood, Silicon Valley, beaches.
Exactly. But the source material you shared with us, it paints a picture of contradictions that are so extreme, so immense in scale, that studying California is. It's less about geography and more about understanding these huge global contrasts, all operating inside one state.
That's absolutely the missions for today. We have to move beyond that tourist image and really grasp the sheer scale, the influence, and the often hidden or ignored crises that define modern California.
Yeah.
The sources confirm this state operates on a truly monumental level, almost like a G7 nation. But its challenges are, well, they're just as monumental.
And we have to start with the statistics. The numbers that really prop up California's global influence, they're almost unbelievable.
They really put the state into perspective. Population-wise, it's still the largest state in the U.S.
Still number one.
Clocking in at almost 40 million residents. That is a staggering concentration of people. I mean, it's roughly the entire population of Canada living in one state.
Wow. But the economic power is where the shock really sets in. The gross state product, the GSP, is the metric we use. And for 2024, it's estimated at, what, $4.172 trillion.
Trillion, yes. And to really contextualize that figure, you have to look at the world stage. If California were an independent nation—
Which is a thought experiment people love to do.
They do, because it measures its impact so well. If it were independent, it would be the fourth largest economy in the world.
Fourth largest globally. I mean, it's just hard to wrap your head around that.
Think about what that means. California's economy is larger than the United Kingdom's, it's larger than India's, and maybe most famously, it's now larger than Japan's entire economy.
So it's trailing only Germany, China.
And the rest of the United States. Exactly. So you have this economic engine with the size and power of a major industrial world power, all functioning within the U.S. federal system.
And this global power is housed in a physical space that is also massive, the third largest state by area, 163,000 square miles. That vastness is what contributes directly to its staggering diversity, ecologically and geographically, which we'll get into.
And this blend of power and landscape brings us to the state's identity, its core aspirational self. It's nicknamed the Golden State, obviously.
The gold rush.
Right, and its motto is the Greek word eureka, meaning I have found it. It speaks to this relentless spirit of discovery and, frankly, fortune-seeking.
The official symbols even reflect that. The California grizzly bear, the golden trout, the California poppy, and then those ecological titans, the coast redwood and the giant sequoia. The names themselves, gold, giants, bears, they just evoke that sense of extremes right away.
They do. And that sets up the central thesis of our deep dive. The real contradiction, the one we have to grapple with, is the simultaneous existence of this tremendous world historical wealth, this $4.172 trillion economy we just mentioned.
Right.
And at the same time, severe systemic failures. We're talking decaying infrastructure, profound water insecurity, and a demographic polarization that results in the highest poverty rate in the entire nation.
So we're dealing with a state that is a globally dominant force, financially and culturally, yet it struggles to provide basic public goods and social stability for a huge portion of its own people.
Exactly.
We need to hold both of those facts in our minds, the gold and the crisis, as we trace its journey from myth to modern reality.
Let's do it.
All right, let's jump into part one, from mythical island to American state. It's just remarkable that the story of California, this hyper-modern technological state, it begins with a literary fantasy, a centuries-old one at that.
It's an origin story that feels like it was scripted for a movie. The name California itself, which Spanish explorers started using for the region, it most likely didn't come from a geographical feature or an indigenous term.
Where did it come from?
From a popular 1510 Spanish epic, a novel called Las Sergas de Esplandian.
Wait, so the state is named after a novel?
Essentially, yeah. The book, written by Garcia Rodriguez de Montalvo, featured this fantastical kingdom ruled by a fictional Amazonian queen named Calafia.
Calafia, California. Okay.
And her realm was described as this remote, isolated island, not a peninsula, that was incredibly rich in gold and pearls. The inhabitants were these beautiful, dark-skinned women who wore gold armor and, well, they bred griffins for war.
That immediately connects the name to this idea of immense, unimaginable mineral wealth, which is incredibly ironic given what happens in 1848.
The irony is perfect. And this fantastical image was so powerful that even after Spanish exploration began, the idea of California as an island, isolated, mysterious, exotic,
Yeah.
It was strong enough that it actually persisted on European maps well into the 18th century.
No way.
Yeah, it took centuries of surveying and repeated expeditions to definitively map the landmass and finally put that myth to rest.
That really explains the Golden State nickname in a whole new light. But let's pivot from the myth to the vibrant, complex reality that was here before colonization, what we could call the original deep dive into California.
Before any Europeans arrived, California was arguably the most culturally and linguistically diverse area in all of pre-Columbian North America.
Really? More than anywhere else?
The sources point to an astonishing level of local specialization. We're talking over 70 distinct ethnic groups, and estimates suggesting at least 300,000 people living here before 1769.
What's particularly fascinating is the level of sophisticated environmental management they practiced. This wasn't just, subsistence living.
Oh, far from it. They developed incredibly complex forms of ecosystem management. This included something modern anthropologists call forest gardening, which is basically cultivating the land to ensure a reliable, regular supply of food and medicinal plants. It's sophisticated, sustainable agriculture without modern tools.
And maybe the most crucial piece of indigenous innovation, one that speaks directly to our modern crises, is about fire management.
Yes, this is so important. The sources highlight that indigenous populations use controlled burning, often called cultural burns, extensively
Why?
to maintain healthy ecosystems and, critically, to mitigate the risk of catastrophic large wildfires. They understood fire as a tool for managing the landscape, for clearing underbrush, and for promoting certain types of plant growth.
And this critical, effective practice was just ignored and then outlawed by the incoming settlers.
That's the tragedy of it. The practice of controlled burning was effectively prohibited across the state starting in 1911. It was part of this move toward total fire suppression.
And that's had disastrous consequences for modern fire cycles.
Absolutely. It took over a century of increasingly intense and destructive megafires for the state government to officially recognize the necessity of this indigenous knowledge.
So they've come back around to it.
Only very recently. In 2022, the state government officially revived and started encouraging controlled burning, often in collaboration with California tribes. It's a profound, if very belated, reversal of a destructive historical policy.
And shifting to social diversity, the sources also mention these unique social and spiritual roles within the pre-contact communities.
They do. Many indigenous societies had roles for individuals who the Spanish called joyas, which translates roughly to jewels.
Yeah.
These were two-spirit people, like the Chumash Aki.
And they had specific roles.
They occupied vital, social, and spiritual roles. They were often responsible for very sensitive tasks, like death, burial, and mourning rituals. They were crucial intermediaries in their communities.
How did the Spanish settlers react to that kind of established social structure?
With absolute hostility. Early Spanish settlers, figures like Governor Pedro Fages in 1775, they explicitly documented their detestation of these individuals. They described their existence as an abominable vice, and they actively sought to eliminate them.
So it wasn't just about land and resources.
No, it shows that colonization was also a deliberate attempt to eradicate fundamental social structures, spiritual practices, and identities that clashed with a rigid European worldview.
Okay, so after that initial mythical exploration, what did the sources tell us about the Spanish and Mexican eras that followed, from, say, 1542 to 1848?
Well, the official Spanish claim started in 1542. Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo sailed up the coast, entered San Diego Bay. But what's interesting is that Spanish control wasn't absolute.
Oh.
The English privateer Francis Drake, he also claimed an undefined portion in 1579. And we have this fascinating detail that Filipino sailors, who were part of the Spanish Manila galleon trade, arrived at Morro Bay in 1587.
So they were some of the first Asians to reach what would become the continental U.S.
Exactly. But the real period of lasting settlement and structural control didn't really start until the late 18th century with the missions.
Right, the Port of La expedition.
Exactly, 1769 to 1770. This expedition established a chain of 21 Spanish missions along El Camino Real, the Royal Road, starting in San Diego and moving north.
And these missions were the seeds for many of the big cities we know today.
San Francisco, Ventura, Santa Barbara, yes. But they were also often brutal institutions for the indigenous populations who were forced into labor there.
Although San Jose has the distinction of being the first civilian established city, right? Founded in 1777, separate from the missions.
Yes, that's an important distinction. It shows these early attempts at establishing a true civilian presence, beyond just the clergy and the military. And at the same time, you had this curious, non-Spanish colonial presence up north.
The Russians at Fort Ross?
The Russian-American Company established Fort Ross in 1812. Their goal wasn't really settlement, it was strategic.
What is the strategy?
To secure a reliable food source, mostly grains and produce, to supply their colonies in Alaska. But the outpost really struggled. It had a hard time establishing viable trade with the isolated Spanish and Mexican population, and it was ultimately abandoned by 1841.
So then Mexico wins its independence from Spain in 1821. How did that political earthquake affect a place as distant as Alta California?
Ironically, Alta California was pretty much unaffected by the actual fighting in the war. But the Californios, the Hispanic residents native to the region, they largely supported independence.
Why?
It was mainly economic. They wanted to end Spain's strict, limiting trade monopoly, which they felt had severely stunted the region's economic development and wealth.
And once Spanish rule was gone, the focus shifted from the mission structure to private land.
That transition was rapid and profound. The Mexican period saw the secularization of the mission system by 1834. And the immense mission lands which were suddenly available were divided up into these massive ranchos, or private cattle ranches.
And the ranchos became the new power structure.
They quickly became the dominant power structure in California.
What was the trade system built on? We think of beef now, but that wasn't the commodity back then.
No, the wealth wasn't in the meat. It was in the durable commodities. Cow hides, used for leather all over the world, and tallow, which is rendered cow fat used for candles and soap. These were traded extensively with Boston and other international merchants.
And this rancho system lasted right up until the U.S. acquisition.
Which was heavily influenced by individuals like John Marsh.
Marsh is a fascinating character. It seems like he used the power of the pen to literally change the map of North America.
Marsh was a big, influential rancher who got deeply frustrated with the volatility and the lack of legal clarity in the Mexican courts, especially with land titles and squatters.
So he decided the only solution was to become part of the U.S.
He concluded that was the region's only path to stability. So he started this influential letter-writing campaign. He was essentially California's first propagandist. He promoted a specific path, Marsh's route, and he just raved about California's perfect climate and rich soil. And that directly spurred the first major organized American immigration wave.
And he also played a direct role in the military conquest.
He did. He played this bizarre, almost diplomatic role during some of the internal conflicts. He successfully convinced both sides to abandon the fight at the Battle of Providencia, which effectively removed the military obstacles and paved a clear strategic path for the U.S. to eventually acquire the territory.
So the formal takeover began with a very short-lived, kind of colorful declaration.
The Bear Flag Revolt in 1846. American settlers, often fueled by Marsh's earlier campaigns, declared the short-lived California Republic right before the Mexican-American War fully broke out.
And their flag gave us the state flag we have today.
With the grizzly bear and the star, yes. They installed William B. Ide as its single president. It barely lasted a month before the U.S. military invasion began.
Which ended with the Treaty of Cahuenga in 1847. But the true inflection point, the real game changer, happened right at the moment of formal annexation.
The discovery that changed history forever. Gold. James Marshall discovered gold at Sutter's Mill in January 1848.
And the timing.
The timing is incredible. It was exactly 1 week before the U.S. officially annexed California with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in February 1848.
So the gold rush instantly transformed the state from this sleepy agricultural outpost into a global demographic magnet.
The numbers are just explosive. It's hard to fathom. In 1846, the non-Indigenous settler population was only around 8,000 people.
Just 8,000.
By 1850, when California applied for statehood, the population had multiplied tenfold to 100,000. And by 1854, over 300,000 settlers had flooded into the state, all looking for their fortune.
San Francisco's growth is a perfect example of this.
It really is. San Francisco was nothing more than a small port with about 500 residents in 1847.
500 people.
And just 23 years later, fueled by the gold trade, it ballooned to 150,000 residents by 1870. The economic ripple effects, the demand for labor, housing, food, transport, that set the stage for California's future as a hyper-capitalist hub.
But as you noted, the gold rush era, which defined the state's Eureka identity, was simultaneously overshadowed by a massive human tragedy, the California genocide. We need to handle this part of the history with the seriousness it demands.
It is essential to understand this part of the American period. Under American administration, the indigenous population experienced a catastrophic decline.
We mentioned the numbers were already down from disease.
Right. Eurasian diseases and the mission system had already cut the population from 300,000 down to around 150,000 by 1846. But the American period brought state-sanctioned violence that drove that number relentlessly down to a mere 15,000 by 1900.
What was the mechanism that allowed this violence to happen on such a systemic scale?
The shocking part is the official involvement of the state government. California's very first governor, Peter Hardeman Burnett, openly advocated for an elimination policy.
He said it out loud.
In his 1851 address, he said that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct.
And that ideology became policy.
It was quickly codified into policy and funding. The state legislature systematically funded this violence, paying various militias about $1.5 million between 1850 and 1860 for their services in carrying out these massacres.
The state paid for massacres.
Yes, and crucially, the sources note that a portion of this funding was later reimbursed by the federal government, so both state and federal authorities are implicated.
And the economic component wasn't just about stealing land for ranches or for gold. It was also a formalized, de facto slavery.
That's often overlooked. The 1850 Act for the Government and Protection of Indians effectively legalized the indentured servitude or slavery of loitering or orphaned Indians.
Wow.
And the sources document the horrifying fact that the Los Angeles City Council even approved slave auctions that operated legally for nearly 20 years.
The sheer number of deaths from this period is overwhelming.
The scholars estimate that direct conflict killed somewhere between 9,500 and 16,000 indigenous people during this period, but some broader estimates of deaths related to all of it, the violence, the starvation, the forced labor during the Gold Rush era, range as high as 100,000 between 1846 and 1873.
It's a record of violence that modern California governors have since acknowledged as genocide.
Yes, underlining the profound moral debt of the state's founding.
That history of exploitation and extreme change really sets the stage for California's physical form, which is itself a spectacle of contradictions. Part 2 is our deep dive into the geography, climate, and ecology of contradiction.
The physical diversity of California is, it's unparalleled among U.S. states. Geographically, it's roughly bisected. That line can be a bit fluid, but you have Northern California with about 48 counties, and Southern California with the 10 southern counties where most of the people live.
And the most immediate sign of this physical intensity is the vertical difference. The highs and lows are almost side by side.
It's geographically jaw-dropping. California contains Mount Whitney in the Sierra Nevada. It's the highest point in the contiguous U.S. at 14,505 feet.
Okay.
Now consider this. Less than 90 miles horizontally from that peak, you have Badwater Basin in Death Valley, which is the lowest and hottest point in North America. It's 279 feet below sea level.
So the highest and lowest points right next to each other.
The proximity is a constant geological reminder of the immense forces that are shaping the state.
And wedged between the mountains and the coast is the Central Valley. It gets overlooked for the glamour zones, but it's the actual heartland of this state's economic output.
The Central Valley is an essential component of the global food chain. It's this massive, fertile trough split by the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. And this delta system is incredibly complex and critical. It provides drinking water for nearly two-thirds of the state. That's 23 million people.
On top of supporting all that agriculture.
On top of supporting the massive, nationally leading San Joaquin Valley agriculture, yes.
What's surprising is how far inland that water allows commerce to reach.
It's a great point. Because of strategic dredging in the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers, several inland cities actually function as seaports, even though they're geographically far from the Pacific. It lets the Central Valley's produce move directly into the global trade system.
We mentioned water infrastructure. The history of lakes here really shows how quickly massive natural resources can be diverted for human use.
It's a powerful lesson. We still have significant bodies of water, like Clear Lake, the largest freshwater lake entirely within California, and Lake Tahoe, the largest by volume, shared with Nevada.
But the story of Tulare Lake is critical.
Historically, it was a massive body of water, maybe the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River.
And it's just gone.
It completely dried up by the early 20th century. Its tributary rivers, the Kern, the Tule, the Kaweah, they were diverted almost entirely to feed the booming agricultural expansion in the Central Valley and to supply growing cities.
So the vanishing of Tulare Lake is this tangible geographical sign of how the state has historically prioritized economic growth over ecological stability.
Exactly. It foreshadows the long-term water wars to come.
So let's talk about the climate, which is just inextricably linked to this geography. Most of the state has that enviable Mediterranean climate.
That's the big picture, yes. But the coastal areas have this unique mechanism that defines their pleasantness. It's called maritime moderation.
How does that work?
It's caused by the cool California current flowing just offshore. So as warm, moist air moves in from the ocean, it hits this cold current, which causes the water vapor to condense. And that creates the famous summer fog.
Ah, the fog. And how does that affect the temperature?
It basically acts as a natural air conditioner.
Yeah.
This is why the summertime temperatures of LA and San Francisco shorelines stay uniquely cool compared to areas at the same latitude, just a little bit inland, or compared to the sweltering East Coast cities. Even San Diego, right on the border with Mexico, stays relatively cool in the summer because of this effect.
And you contrast that coastal cool with the interior, which holds world records for heat.
The deserts are extreme. Death Valley is widely recognized as the hottest place in the world. It recorded a staggering 134 degrees Fahrenheit back in 1913.
Wow.
And on the flip side, the high mountains of the Sierra Nevada have an alpine climate with Arctic temperatures in the winter, which creates the massive snowpack that is absolutely crucial for feeding the state's river systems when it melts.
And this dramatic, volatile geography and climate, it leads to constant environmental hazards that really strain the infrastructure.
The threats are relentless, and they come from all sides. The state faces constant risks from tsunamis, landslides, and, due to climate change, the intensification of both droughts. The 2011 to 2017 period was the worst ever recorded, and intense flooding.
Which is caused by what are called atmospheric rivers.
Yes. For anyone who might not be familiar with that term, an atmospheric river is essentially a massive, concentrated stream of water vapor moving through the atmosphere.
It sounds powerful.
It can carry the equivalent of the flow of the Amazon River. So when these hit the mountain ranges, they release massive amounts of rain and snow in very short periods. It shifts the state violently from drought to flood and puts immense stress on dams, reservoirs, and urban drainage systems.
And of course, there's the ever-present threat of earthquakes.
Because of the San Andreas Fault and numerous others in the complex system, California experiences about 37,000 recorded earthquakes a year.
37,000.
And when you look at national risk assessments, two-thirds of the nation's total earthquake risk is concentrated in California alone. It's a sobering statistic given the state's population density and its reliance on complex, fragile infrastructure.
So moving to the ecology, this is where California truly hits world records for unique life, especially its plants.
It is a global hotspot, truly.
Yeah.
California is one of the ecologically richest and most diverse parts of the world. It spans a stunning 6 distinct life zones, from the lower Sonoran Desert all the way up to the Arctic zones you find in the high mountains.
And the trees are the kings here.
They hold the world's superlatives, yes. The giant sequoia is not the tallest tree, but it is the largest living organism on Earth by volume.
Okay.
The coast redwood holds the record for the tallest living organism. And then you have the Methuselah bristlecone pine, found in the White Mountains. It's been dated at over 5,000 years old, making it one of the oldest non-clonal living things on the planet.
This blend of massive size and ancient longevity is just unique.
It really is.
There's also a subtle, surprising ecological fact about the visual landscape that we mentioned earlier.
Yes, that classic romantic image of California's hills turning that beautiful golden brown in the summer.
Right.
That color is actually a sign of ecological change. It happened because the native perennial grasses, which evolved to withstand drought, were largely replaced by invasive European annual grasses after colonization. It changed the entire look and the fire susceptibility of the foothills.
And the conservation efforts today highlight the fragility of these unique zones.
The sources mention the specific need to protect the western Joshua tree, that recognizable, unique desert native you find in the Mojave.
It's an iconic image.
It is. And it received important protection under the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act of 2023, which signals a crucial effort to safeguard species that are facing existential threats from development and rapid climate shift.
And the number of species currently threatened really reinforces the need for those protections.
Absolutely. The state manages an extensive network of almost 300,000 acres of national wildlife refuges. But despite this, 123 animal species and 178 plant species in California are currently listed as endangered or threatened.
And the fauna spans everything from giants like the California condor and the gray whale to local delicacies like the Dungeness crab.
And the endemic California red-legged frog. It's an incredible spectrum of life.
Let's switch gears dramatically to part 3, the engine of culture and economy. This is where California transforms its physical resources into global intellectual and financial dominance.
Yeah, California doesn't just produce culture for the U.S. It exports global entertainment and technology paradigms that influence billions of lives every single day. The concentration of power is immense, and it starts in Los Angeles with Hollywood.
Hollywood's influence is just undeniable.
Since the 1920s, it's remained the undisputed center of the U.S. film industry, profoundly shaping global entertainment and how we even tell stories. It's home to what we call the Big Five film studios: Columbia, Disney, Paramount, Universal, and Warner Bros.
So the entire mechanism for global storytelling often originates in just a few square miles of Southern California.
That's right. And paralleling that in the north, you have the technology sector, which is equally dominant.
Silicon Valley.
Centered in the San Francisco Bay Area, it is the foundational hub of the global technology industry. This region hosts three of the global Big Five tech companies: Apple, Meta, which is Facebook, and Google, alongside other giants like Netflix, Intel, and HP.
So the decisions made there about software, hardware, and AI, they dictate the direction of the modern world.
They absolutely do. And beyond screens and software, the state has fundamentally shaped modern music and mobility.
It's an incredible engine for music genres.
It really is. California is the birthplace of international genres like surf music, G-funk, psychedelic rock, and influential metals, thrash, glam, and nu metal.
The cultural gravity was so strong that even famous British bands moved there.
Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones. Many of them found a second home and a ton of creative inspiration there.
And the physical landscape, particularly Southern California, it enabled the rise of modern car culture.
Southern California is considered the true birthplace of modern car culture. The necessity of covering vast distances, combined with a climate that makes driving year-round pleasant, it just cemented the car as the primary cultural artifact. You can see that legacy in its pioneering freeway systems and its continued love affair with the automobile.
And its dominance in professional sports also reflects that cultural might and massive population base.
Oh, absolutely. California has 18 major professional sports league franchises, 3 NFL teams, 4 MLB, 4 NBA, 3 NHL, plus soccer. It's more than any other state in the nation.
And it holds a unique Olympic record.
It's the only U.S. state to have hosted both the Summer Olympics 1932, 1984, and the upcoming 2028 Games in L.A., and the Winter Olympics, which were in 1960 at Squaw Valley.
The sources also point out that California is the foundational location for several global action sports.
Surfing, snowboarding, and skateboarding were essentially invented and codified in California. And sports like volleyball and beach soccer were popularized there. It's a global trendsetter in physical culture as much as in screen culture.
Okay, let's pivot now to the state's demographic tides, which are rapidly reshaping its social and political landscape.
This is a complex but absolutely critical area for understanding modern California. One crucial shift is internal. For the first time since the gold rush, native-born Californians now form the majority.
So the state is maturing, in a way.
Exactly. But the external migration patterns have pivoted sharply in the last couple of decades.
How so?
That pivot is profound. Since the late 2000s, immigration from Latin America has dropped significantly. Net migration from Mexico is now near zero, or in some years, even negative.
More people leaving than arriving.
Exactly. It's a dramatic change from 20th century trends.
So if Latin American immigration has slowed, where are the new immigrants coming from?
The majority of new immigrants now come from Asia, specifically China, India, and the Philippines. This makes Asian Americans the fastest growing racial and ethnic group in the state. And that influx is driving economic activity and cultural change, especially in the tech centers.
Despite that pivot, the state remains historically and statistically dominated by one large ethnic group.
Yes, Hispanics and Latinos are still the largest single ethnic group. They made up 39.4% as of the 2020 census. Meanwhile, the non-Hispanic white population has declined dramatically. It fell from 80% in 1970 to 34.7% in 2020.
That shift makes California a demographic bellwether for the rest of the country.
It really does.
And this profound diversity makes linguistic complexity a given, especially with Spanish.
Right. While English is the de jure and de facto official language that was enshrined by Prop 63 in 1986, Spanish is the second most common. It's spoken by over 28% of the population, and its importance is deeply intertwined with California's founding.
That historical context is often forgotten when we talk about modern language policy.
Absolutely. The state's very first constitution in 1849 was intentionally written and published in both English and Spanish. It was a recognition of the significant California population and their role in society.
But that was stripped out later.
Yes. That constitutional recognition was removed in the revised 1879 Constitution. And the debate over bilingual education has continued ever since, often dictated by these proposition votes.
Like Prop 58 in 2016.
Right, which reversed the prohibition on bilingual education, allowing for the return of dual language instruction. But implementation is slow. It faces barriers like funding and chronic teacher shortages.
And it's not just Spanish.
Not at all. California also has the highest concentration nationwide of Chinese, Vietnamese, and Punjabi speakers. It highlights the truly global nature of its linguistic landscape.
Okay, so let's bring the cultural influence and diversity back to the economic engine. This is where that extreme contradiction in wealth and poverty is most visible.
The foundational mechanism of California's global trade starts right on its coast. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are, respectively, the largest and second largest U.S. ports.
And together?
Together, they handle about 40% of all goods imported to the U.S. by container volume. They are a critical node in the global supply chain. Their efficiency impacts inflation and supply across the entire country.
And while tech and trade dominate, the foundation of the state's wealth is still the land itself, especially agriculture.
California still leads the nation in agricultural output. It's fueled by massive production of dairy, almonds, and grapes, among hundreds of other specialty crops.
The numbers are still huge.
Farming-related sales reached nearly $31 billion back in 2004, and that growth has continued, though it's increasingly strained by declining acreage and that chronic water instability we talked about.
So now we have to confront the central contradiction. This monumental economic success sits directly next to profound economic hardship.
That juxtaposition is staggering. On one hand, California ranks extremely high in per capita GDP, $85,546 in 2021, and it has the highest number of millionaire households in the country, over 1 million of them.
And that wealth is concentrated.
Very concentrated in the coastal areas and tech hubs. But on the other hand, poverty is pervasive.
How do they measure that?
When you use the supplemental poverty measure, which accounts for the high cost of housing and utilities, California actually has the highest poverty rate in the U.S.
The highest in the nation.
At 23.5%. The immense housing costs on the coast force low and middle-income residents into desperate situations or into economically depressed regions further inland.
Like the Central Valley, the engine of the state's agricultural wealth.
Exactly. The Central Valley, despite its massive output of food, has historically been characterized by economists as one of the most economically depressed regions in the U.S., on par with areas like Appalachia.
So you have this world-class wealth machine on the coast, financed by venture capital and tech IPOs, existing at the same time as entrenched economic hardship in the agricultural heartland.
Where low wages and precarious water supplies create this systemic vulnerability, it's the core contradiction of the state.
That deep chasm between wealth and systemic failure sets the stage perfectly for Part 4, government, infrastructure, and future challenges. How does this massive, powerful, yet unequal state even govern itself?
Well, the government structure is standard executive, legislative, judicial, but the sheer scale drives the complexity. The judicial system, for example, is the largest in the U.S. It employs 1,600 judges.
How does that compare to the federal system?
The entire federal system has only 840 judges. So California's judiciary is almost twice the size. That scale requires immense resources just for basic function.
Politically, California is widely seen as a trendsetter, especially for progressive sociocultural policies.
It is overwhelmingly liberal and democratic compared to inland states. Democrats hold a supermajority in both the state Senate and the Assembly, which lets them pass legislation without any Republican support.
But that's a relatively recent thing.
It is. It's worth noting that from the 1950s through the late 1980s, California was actually Republican-leaning in presidential elections.
But the state allows direct public participation through ballot propositions. And that can often bypass the political establishment and lead to some conflicting results.
The proposition system allows for the initiative, where citizens propose laws, the referendum, where they vote on laws passed by the legislature, and the recall, where they can remove elected officials.
It gives voters immense power.
It does. For example, voters have used this system to approve massive state funding for stem cell research, but they've also repeatedly rejected affirmative action policies. It shows the complex and sometimes conservative power of the electorate when it bypasses the legislature.
The sources also detail the use of a unique primary system.
Yes. The state uses a nonpartisan blanket primary for most offices. This means all candidates, regardless of party, appear on a single ballot, and the top 2 vote-getters advance to the general election.
Even if they're from the same party.
even if they're from the same party. The idea is to promote moderation, but it often leads to different strategic outcomes than you see in closed primaries.
We're seeing a recent politically charged example of California trying to project its influence nationally through this system, specifically with redistricting.
This is a direct political response to actions in other large states. The sources highlight that Governor Newsom got legislative approval for Proposition 50, which voters will decide on in November 2025.
And the goal of this initiative
Is to alter the congressional map with the stated goal of switching 5 seats from Republican to Democratic control.
so it's a clear tactical response.
It is. It's explicitly framed as a countermeasure to Texas Republican efforts to gain seats through their own aggressive redistricting. It shows California using its political and demographic weight to influence national politics outside of traditional federal elections.
Before leaving governance, we have to mention the peculiar status of the death penalty.
It's still legally on the books in California, which also has the largest death row population in the country. But despite its legal status, the state hasn't carried out an execution since 2006.
So it creates this moral and legal limbo for hundreds of inmates.
It does.
Let's discuss the critical infrastructure systems, starting with the energy paradox.
This is a classic contradiction. California is one of the largest energy users in the nation just because of its population and economic size.
Yeah.
Yet, due to decades of aggressive conservation mandates, strict building codes, and the mild climate in major population centers, its per capita energy use is actually one of the smallest of any state.
So even with low per capita use, the total demand is so high that it has to rely heavily on external sources.
It imports more electricity than any other state, mainly hydroelectric power from the Pacific Northwest and power from natural gas and coal plants in the desert Southwest.
So to counter that dependency, California has set some of the country's most aggressive renewable goals.
Right, aiming for clean or renewable operations by 2035 under the Clean Energy, Jobs, and Affordability Act of 2022.
And the state has the physical resources to back that up.
It does. It's home to massive solar farms like Avampa in the Mojave Desert and some of the largest wind farms in the U.S. at Altamont and Tehachapi Passes. It's making this massive, multi-billion-dollar bet on green infrastructure.
However, even in this pursuit of clean energy, there is an immediate, immense infrastructure risk involving the legacy of nuclear power.
This is maybe the most dramatic contradiction of safety and risk. California has only one major nuclear plant still operating, Diablo Canyon. But the San Onofre plant, which was shut down in 2013, left behind a terrifying legacy.
Which is?
More than 1,700 tons of highly radioactive waste.
And where is that waste currently stored?
It's stored right on the coast, in an area that the state's own geological surveys acknowledge has a recorded history of past tsunamis.
That's not ideal.
And voters banned the approval of new nuclear plants back in the late 70s precisely because of this intractable problem of waste disposal. It means the state has not found a safe, long-term solution, leaving this critical risk just abandoned on the beach.
The complexity of water security mirrors the energy issue. It's both an engineering marvel and a source of constant conflict.
The state's interconnected water system is truly massive. It's considered the world's largest, managing over 40 million acre-feet of water a year through thousands of miles of canals, tunnels, and dams. The struggle to secure supplies has been defining since the state's founding.
We mentioned the drawing of Tulare Lake. The most famous example of this conflict is the historical water wars.
The historical water wars between Los Angeles and the Owens Valley in the early 20th century, where LA secured water rights and engineered aqueducts to move the water south. It defined the state's political landscape and showed the lengths urban centers would go to secure water, leaving environmental devastation behind them.
And this conflict continues today, with droughts straining water and electricity security. Yet we are seeing some progress, particularly in ecological restoration and reconciliation with tribal nations.
That is a significant bright spot. The announced removal of 4 dams on the Klamath River in 2022 represents the largest dam removal and river restoration project in U.S. history.
And this is seen as a huge win for California tribes.
A major ecological win and a significant step toward justice for the tribes in securing water rights and restoring the health of that river.
Okay, finally, let's look at transportation and mobility. California pioneered car culture, but today its infrastructure seems to be struggling under the weight of that legacy.
The state was certainly an innovator. The Arroyo Seco Parkway, connecting LA and Pasadena, opened in 1940. It was the first freeway in the western U.S.
And the Golden Gate Bridge was a marvel.
It held the record for the world's longest suspension bridge main span for nearly 3 decades. California defined modern civil engineering for transportation,
But the current reality suggests that pioneering spirit has given way to decay.
unfortunately. The sources note that California's roads are currently ranked among the 3 worst in the U.S.,
The three worst.
according to the Reason Foundation, yes, trailing only Alaska and Rhode Island. The combination of population density, seismic activity, and underinvestment has severely strained all transportation networks.
Resulting in that notorious congestion and decay.
Exactly.
Air travel remains globally central, though.
Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, is the 4th busiest globally by passenger volume. It cements California's role as an international gateway. And while car culture dominates, the state has highly utilized rail systems.
Amtrak California.
The Amtrak California routes, Capital Corridor, Pacific Surfliner, Gold Runner, are the busiest intercity rail lines outside the Northeast Corridor.
So there's a reliance on rail, but the state has this monumental, future-defining project to move people off the freeways entirely. High-speed rail.
That's the vision. The California High-Speed Rail Project. It was approved by voters way back in 2008, and construction began in 2015.
So where is it at now?
The first 171-mile segment is currently planned to be operational by 2030, connecting parts of the Central Valley. However, the completion of the full north-to-south route, which was supposed to connect San Francisco to L.A.,
That's the real goal.
that's the dream. But it continues to face ongoing, massive funding issues and political hurdles. It just highlights the difficulty in executing these monumental public works in a state this vast and politically complex.
This whole exploration of the source material has given us an incredible look into the true face of California. It's a state that operates at a scale that is both globally dominant and at the same time deeply fractured by its own history and internal contradictions.
Absolutely. The persistent defining characteristic is just the extreme contrast. We see the world-beating wealth of Silicon Valley and Hollywood set against the highest poverty rate in the entire nation.
We started with the fantastical origin story of Queen Calafia's Gold Island, only to confront the documented tragedy of the Gold Rush era and the subsequent California genocide.
And the physical contradictions are just as stark. You've got Mount Whitney and Death Valley separated by less than 90 miles. And that's mirrored by the infrastructure dilemma, these aggressive renewable energy goals versus 1,700 tons of radioactive nuclear waste sitting directly on a tsunami-prone coast.
We also saw how essential indigenous knowledge, like controlled fire management, has finally been officially recognized and revived after being actively outlawed for over a century.
It demonstrates how the past constantly informs the state's most urgent modern crises.
California's history is just characterized by massive rapid change, from the gold rush population booms to the current population pivots toward Asian immigration, and from mission secularization to tech revolutions.
So, as you integrate this detailed understanding of the Golden State, here's a final provocative thought for you to contemplate, one that builds on all the material we've explored.
Given California's status as a powerful liberal trendsetter and the global financial scale of its $4.1 trillion economy, how do these extreme contradictions, specifically the disconnect between its monumental GSP and its highest poverty rate, combined with its severely strained and aging infrastructure, position the state to lead, or to fail, in adapting to the most urgent environmental and social challenges of the mid-21st century?